Caffeine, the single most useful molecule for students and adults of all ages, even revered as the elixir of life. Almost 70% of Americans drink caffeinated drinks every single day. Coffee, for example, the epitome of caffeinated drinks, is consumed worldwide. In fact, we drink over 2 billion cups of coffee a day. Some people use caffeine to get more energy, to make sure they can focus on their next class, their test, or to keep themselves from falling asleep at work after a long night. Caffeine is wonderful at keeping one awake, and I speak from experience. But what if I told you sleeping is actually the perfect way to enhance the power of caffeine?
Now, you may be wondering, how's that possible? Caffeine is supposed to keep me awake. How will sleeping enhance its effect? Well, let's start with the basics. What is the chemistry of caffeine, or more accurately, C8H10N4O2? Well, that is the basic formula for caffeine. And if we were to draw out the Lewis structure, we can see that this molecule is arranged in a ring structure with carbon bonded to nitrogen with three methyl groups attached to the sides, which gives it the name trimethylxanthine. Methyl groups are groups of CH3. These groups are generally nonpolar and stable. However, caffeine has another type of group, the carbonyl group, where a carbon is double bonded to an oxygen atom. Carbonyl groups are typically polar.
These carbonyl groups, however, are clustered towards one side, which overall makes the caffeine molecule polar as well. Caffeine mostly has sp2 hybridizations on their central atoms. This means that, mostly, there are a lot of trigonal planars in their molecules, along with a bond angle of 120 degrees. Caffeine is also a relatively lighter molecule in our body. It is only 194 grams per mole, which may seem like a lot, but really, it's actually much lighter than other molecules in our body. The ring structure that caffeine is organized into is known as the Purin ring structure. A Purin ring structure has 9 atoms that form a double-fused ring. Purin ring structures are proliferative and are used in the creation of several important molecules, including adenine, guanine, which are bases used in our DNA, RNA, and ATP, which then help code proteins. Caffeine specifically gets its structure from xanthine, which is another organic compound. These structures have enhanced stability due to their shared atoms in the two interconnected cyclic structures in the molecule. The same structure is also used to create adenosine, which is famously the molecule that makes us tired. Coincidence? I think not.
Caffeine is also an alkaloid, which means that it is naturally occurring compound containing nitrogen. This also makes caffeine a weak base because the four nitrogens have lone pairs of electrons that can accept H plus ions. Since it is an alkaloid, it can be naturally found in plants. So plants are what are keeping us awake all day. 60 plants specifically. There are coffee plants, tea plants, and cocoa plants, which all produce caffeine.
This is the basic chemistry behind a caffeine molecule, including its structure and polarity. But why does this matter? Well, the molecule that makes us tired and sleepy, adenosine, is remarkably similar to caffeine. It makes no sense, right? How can something that makes us sleepy and something that keeps us awake be so similar? Well, that is the key. Keep your friends close, but enemies closer. That saying applies here as well. Now, the enemy here is clearly adenosine, the molecule that makes us sleepy. So let's examine its chemical properties first. Adenosine is a neurotransmitter in your brain that, once it reaches a certain threshold, causes fatigue and sleepiness. Adenosine is actually one of the building blocks of RNA, as well as ATP, ADP, and AMP. Adenosine levels in your body rise throughout the day, and they start to drop once you go to sleep. So essentially, caffeine has to fight your adenosine levels to keep you awake all day. And the later you drink caffeine, the more adenosine buildup it has to fight. But, going back to our previous point, caffeine and adenosine are not very different chemically.
In fact, adenosine also has a purine ring, but it is attached to a deoxyribose sugar ring. Adenosine activates receptors in our brain that make us tired. These receptors have several subtypes that can be binded to, including A1, A2A, A2B, and A3. Caffeine has more affinity towards the A1 and A2A receptors. The A1 receptor focuses more on the brain and heart. Activating it will lower one's heart rate, which contributes to making you sleepy. A2A focuses on movement and regulates dopamine release to make your body more sleepy or tired. A2B focuses on lungs, cells, and blood vessels, and A3 mostly focused on the immune system. These last two have less of a prominent role in making someone sleepy. Caffeine has the strongest effect on the two main ones that contribute to sleepiness. And here comes the trick with caffeine. Caffeine basically copies the adenosine and tricks the receptors into letting them bind, even though they aren't adenosine molecules. Since they have such similar structures, the receptors accept caffeine as well. Now, caffeine and adenosine both have a purine ring, but adenosine has a sugar tail attached.
So, while our caffeine molecule fits into the receptors that affect our level of tiredness, our receptors will only activate under adenosine, since the sugar acts as a sort of key. Essentially, caffeine is able to fix itself into adenosine receptors, but it will not turn the lock to activate those receptors. Without the caffeine, if the adenosine made it to the receptors, your brain would receive a sleep signal. However, since caffeine and adenosine are now competing for a receptor, the caffeine is able to block off a substantial amount of adenosine. On top of this, caffeine is slightly more nonpolar than adenosine, which makes it easier for it to travel through organic matter, allowing it to reach the brain faster and act as a stimulant. Adenosine is also much heavier than caffeine. It is 267 grams per mole. This means that caffeine can more easily diffuse through matter and pass the blood-brain barrier more than adenosine.
So why is it that caffeine can't instantly make us super energized? It's lighter than adenosine and more nonpolar, so it can easily get through the receptors into our brain. Well, the problem here is that the caffeine has to compete with the adenosine that is already there to get to the receptors. While caffeine will block the adenosine if it gets to the receptors first, it can't do anything about the adenosine that's already there. It can't simply take the place of adenosine or kick them out. So, here is where our problem-solving skills come into play. Adenosine is what causes us to be tired. So, what should one do when they're tired? The natural and straightforward answer is to sleep, and that's absolutely correct. If you take a quick nap, even one as short as 15 minutes, you can get rid of the adenosine that are activating the receptors and hence making you more tired. If you get rid of those, then the caffeine won't have any adenosine to compete with to get to your receptors.
Along the same lines, theophylline is another stimulant present in chai and tea that works similar to caffeine by blocking adenosine receptors. It is in the same family as caffeine, the methylxanthine. The main chemical difference between the two is that caffeine has an extra methyl group, which increases CNS penetration, which means that more of the substance can get into the bloodstream. Furthermore, theophylline has a longer half-life than caffeine. While not by much, theophyllaine's half-life can have a much higher range than caffeine based on one's genetic factors, including age. So overall, while theophylline is technically more potent, since caffeine can more easily get into the bloodstream, their effectiveness is quite similar. Caffeine, however, is known to affect more of the brain, while theophylline affects organs more.